If you are autistic, you need to really become familiar with this concept of the Uncanny Valley. We talked about this, I think, maybe a year or so ago. But when we talk about autism, the first thing that seems to come to mind is that we are rejected. People don't like us. And the concept of the Uncanny Valley helps us understand that, why that is. And the reason we're talking about this at the very onset of this presentation may seem a little odd because we're going to talk about, 6 or 7 things, traits that people really love about those of us who are autistic or have Asperger syndrome, high functioning autism. But to get to that, we got to get over the Uncanny Valley, or the explanation of why people really don't like us. In the Uncanny Valley is a term used to describe the relationship between a human-like appearance of a robotic object and the emotional response it evokes. So here is a robot and it looks really human. And that evokes an emotional response for those who are interacting with this robot. And what we discover is when the robot becomes extremely human-like, people don't like it. That's weird because the more human it seems to be, the more they like it, but only up to a point. The whole idea of the Uncanny Valley was brought to light in 1970 by a Japanese scientist by the name of Masahiro Mori. 1970. To put that in perspective, I was a junior in high school in 1970. That was a very long time ago. And here's what we read. When robots appear close but not quite human, people tend to feel uncomfortable or even disgusted. Once the Uncanny Valley has been reached, people feel uneasy, disturbed, and sometimes afraid. Well, it turns out that people, and this is my theory, this is my hypothesis, I didn't get this anywhere else, so feel free to disagree with me. But my understanding is the reason that people don't like those of us who are autistic is because we are living in the Uncanny Valley. Now, we're not robots, obviously, but we have that same emotional response. There's something about us that, obviously, we're human, but we're just a little bit off. There's something off about that, and I could go on and talk about why that is. Probably that has something to do with the fact that people who are a little bit off, maybe they have a disease. Or they have a virus. And over generations, thousands of generations, those people who avoided those who were a little bit off survived to pass on their genes. But those who didn't avoid them, usually they were okay, but sometimes that person was a little bit off because he had a disease and, it killed people. The reason people feel uncomfortable is because, we're bred by time over a period of time. Or, if you prefer, maybe we're just created that way. I don't know why, but maybe we are. So with that out of the way, now we understand why people think we're a little bit, they use terms like creepy or weird or strange, whatever, but within that confine, within that substrate, there are other things that make them love us. And you've probably seen this in your life if you are autistic. While in general, overall, people reject you, but there's always somebody that, you hit it off with them. Maybe not very many, but they are there. So we want to know what it is that makes people feel good about being around us, as rare as it may be. And once we understand that, then maybe we can take those traits and we can work on them. We can develop them and make them even stronger. So we're going to start with number 8 because the last video, you go back and watch it if you'd like. I encourage you to do that. We touched on numbers 1 through 7, and the video got a decent response, so I thought, okay, well, let's finish it out, and let's do the next 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, what is that, 6? And number 8 is this. People like us. People like people who are good partners. And those of us with autism who are autistic, I should say, who are autistic rather than have autism would be a better way to say it, tend to make good partners because, as we talked about in our last video, we tend to be very loyal. Once we are committed to something, we have this underlying sense, the strength, I should say, of right and wrong, and being disloyal is just wrong. You know, I was watching a video made by Robert Sapolsky, and I hope I pronounced his name right, Sapolsky. And in that video, he explained why some people were honest. And the question was, are people honest because they have control of their will? They have really strong self-control? And he said studies show no. He said the reason people are honest is because some people are just honest. It's not a matter of a strong will to resist stealing something. They would have to have a strong will to steal something.
And it was a matter of grace. The people who never cheated, it wasn't because they had the strongest frontal cortexes. It's because you don't do that. It was that simple. It wasn't a temptation.
And I believe that same principle is true with those of us with autism, Asperger syndrome, high-functioning autism. That we make good partners because, well, maybe we have some difficulty communicating. Did I say some? I probably should say we have a huge problem with communicating. That is one of the things that psychologists say you really need to have a good lasting partnership. And we don't have it. But this thing about loyalty seems to override all of those flaws. So we're not dismissing those flaws. We're, admitting them. Sometimes we even embrace them. So this is what we read from, and I found this at stanford.edu, Stanford University's website. Arguably, the test of loyalty is conduct rather than the intensity of feeling, but a certain stickiness or perseverance. So, what do we take away from that? People with autism, we're sticky. So we're sticky in two different ways. Sticky, we stick to what we're doing, and we're sticky in that we persevere. We just keep on doing it. Now, some people would say that's a flaw, but when it comes to good partners, I don't know about you, but I want to be with somebody who is sticky. Not literally, but somebody who is going to stick to this partnership and be very loyal. And nobody's perfect, we all have our flaws when it comes to loyalty, but that's one thing that I believe people love about those of us with autism. Number 9, we're humble, and we brag about it, right? Well, if you brag about being humble, then you're not humble. The challenge that we face is a lot of times people confuse our behavior with narcissists because we tend to be alone and introspective. Talk about that in a second. So we tend to be alone and introspective, and people think that we are aloof, But because we are the opposite of narcissist, we are humble. People like that. Sometimes they take advantage of us because of it, but other people, many people, some people, find that as a valuable trait in an individual, and they love it. Now, the word humble comes from the word humus. What is that, Greek? Latin? I don't really know, but it means earth. Okay, so a person who is humble, I don't want to say they're earthy, but I would say they're just down to earth. Or another way to say it is we tend to be centered. Or we tend to be realistic. You've heard about people who are flighty, airheads, and their brains seem to be way out, somewhere else. People who are autistic seem to be the opposite of that. Now, we may not come across that way, we may not present that way, but the fact of the matter is we do seem to be down to earth. All right, now when it comes to humility, I found that this is positivepsychology.com. I did some research and I found this little bit of wisdom on that site. And it had 3 points when it was talking about humility. Number one, there is accurate self-perception. That is to say, we know who we are. And people with autism, I think, maybe early in life got no idea who you are. You're really confused. I know I was. But I did know this. I knew I was different. I knew I was very different. And I knew that because I got feedback from everybody all the time, nonstop, 24/7. So you get the message, when it's shouted at you, figuratively speaking, and when it's shouted at you nonstop. So we get this self-perception that, there's something odd here. And we're calling it the Uncanny Valley. I, didn't hear that term. Well, nobody did. I don't think before 1970, but that's, even though the term didn't exist, the principle was there always, as long as there have been humans. So we have this accurate self-perception, but we also have a modest self-portrayal. So perception is how we see ourselves, but portrayal is how we present to others. Now, I got to tell you, I know some people with Asperger syndrome, with autism, who are just downright obnoxious. They're loud, and I don't think that's the majority. Maybe it is, but my experience, no, I don't think so. I think they're just acting out their frustration, and that's the way they do it. But by and large, there is a presentation of modesty. We don't like to push ourselves ever. Well, that can be a flaw because, we always fall behind, and there's usually a lot of people more than willing to push us back along with ourselves. So other people push us back, we push ourselves back, but that is an indication of modesty, which is a trait that people love in other people. Modesty in the sense that not just morality, but humility, down to earth. And the third thing they mentioned was other-oriented relational stance. Now, that may seem a little strange for those of us with autism, because we have a difficult time communicating not only verbally but emotionally and consequently socially. But that doesn't mean that we are not other-oriented. It just means that we don't have the relationship that others have, and that other-oriented without the relational stance. But that other-oriented stance, that describes people with autism. And I think people love that about us. Well, they love it about anybody. Number 10 is it seems that we compliment extroverts. All right, here's what we read at psychologytoday.com. And I thought this was a value bit of information. Two people who are ego-centered are not likely to get along. An ego-centered person is one who believes that what he or she wants, desires, prefers, values, or believes is good, right, and true, and therefore that others should share the same subjective states or as rather he or she does. If one individual is ego-centered while the other is not, there's a greater chance that the relationship will last, but it's not likely to be very functional. So we do tend to compliment extroverts, and people love that about us. But you know what? I'm not sure that is good for those of us with autism, because even though we may get along with extroverts, we also tend to be taken advantage by extroverts. But still, people like that about us. They love it about us. I personally don't. I think it is. I think it's a flaw, but we're talking about how others perceive us and how they receive us. Number 11 is we are thoughtful and introspective. And why do people find that attractive. Why do they find it attractive in those of us who live in that valley? Well, here's what we read at psychologytoday.com. Given psychology is all about the mind, and it is, introspection plays an important role in mental health. I think that's kind of obvious. For example, if we are unable to identify our emotions, how are we supposed to understand or manage them? Or if we are unable to notice the thoughts that give rise to negative emotions, how are we to change these thoughts to create a happier mind? Through introspection, we can gain knowledge about our inner workings. This knowledge can help us improve our lives. Well, guess what? Who is more introspective than a person with autism? This is not necessarily selfishness. This is almost a mandate that we be introspective because we really don't have a choice. And what happens is, as we become introspective, then we're able to identify those negative emotions, and hopefully we're able to not only confront them, but deal with them successfully. Yeah, I know it's a struggle. I mean, here I am in my 70s and I still have a challenge with this. But because we understand ourselves, probably more so than others, we're able to understand others. Now, the fact that we dwell upon it and others don't doesn't mean that they've got their act together and they don't have to think about being introspective. They don't have to think about themselves in that introspective sense, self-examination. It means they just don't do it. You know, it never occurs to a lot of people who are neurotypical to look inside themselves. They just don't even think of doing it. But people with autism, it seems like, yeah, that's pretty much occupies our time 24/7. But the point being is this. That makes us thoughtful. That makes us introspective. That kind of compels us to get our proverbial act together. But I know we're not necessarily always good at it, but it compels us to do that nonetheless. And so we're always focused, always thinking on self-improvement. Now, here's the key to that. You know, it's kind of hard to help somebody if you can't help yourself. It's hard to see inside somebody else, and I know. People say that those of us with autism are really lacking in empathy, and we're going to touch on that in a moment because it's true, in part. But it's also important to understand that we can't help other people if we can't help ourselves. You know, it's kind of like you can't give away money if you don't have any. You can't give somebody a ride if you don't have a car. So, is it selfish to have money? Is it selfish to have a car? I would say under circumstances, it's selfish not to have those things. So if we don't have the currency of introspection, we can't distribute it to other people. We can't help them see inside ourselves. So think of introspection as our currency. That is what we have to give away. That is what we have to help others. Now, I got to tell you, that is a very positive trait that other people love about us. Some people. Again, you got to keep in mind that uncanny valley, that when we say that people love us, we're not talking about everybody. We're not talking about the majority. I would say we're talking about maybe 5%, and I'm just guessing. But maybe 5% are able to see through the uncanny valley, and they see the value of autism and these traits that we have. And we need to be aware of that. As I said earlier, we can take those traits and we can build on them. Cognitive perspective taking may be defined as the ability to infer thoughts or beliefs in another agent, while effective perspective taking may be defined as the ability to infer emotions or feelings of another agent. Now, what we're talking about here is not introspection, but empathy. Remember, we just mentioned this a few minutes ago, that people with autism are generally perceived, and rightfully so, of lacking empathy. That is, we don't get other people. And that is so very true. Well, I think up to a point, now there are a lot of therapists and psychologists would probably beg to differ with me, and they may not even beg, they just do it. But when I stop and read this understanding that there are two kinds of empathy, there is cognitive empathy and there is affective empathy. So once again, cognitive perspective taking may be defined as the ability to infer thoughts. So cognitive empathy is, we're mind readers. Maybe not we, but that's a person with cognitive empathy. But a person with affective empathy can infer emotions. So the difference between cognitive and affective is one is a mind reader, a thought reader, and the other is an emotion reader. And I don't know that I'm good at either, but I think pretty good at emotions, particularly when people are hurt or wounded or lonely or set aside, because I've been there. And you've been there. And those people would be the ones who really love us because we know where they're coming from. And that, I believe, is why people with autism need to support each other. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we hate our autism, so we want to separate ourselves, divorce ourselves from other people who have autism, because we don't want to be a part of that. We want to be like we want to be in the hive mind. But those of us who are really centered, talked about that before, the humus, the humility, then we see it. We see what others are going through because we can't miss it, because we're going through it ourselves. I mean, how can you not see it? So I would say in that sense, and probably that sense alone, that people with autism really are empathetic. We can support each other. Now, I don't know about you, but I love that about people with autism. That's one of the reasons I have this YouTube channel, is reaching out and helping people with autism, because I know what they're going through. Now, not as individuals, obviously, because we're all unique, but generally speaking, I know what you're going through. So is that empathy? Well, that is effective empathy. That is being able to understand or comprehend other people's emotions. What are you thinking? I got no idea. I don't have that cognitive empathy, but effective empathy, there it is. And people love that. Let me rephrase that. Autistic people should love that. And I think many do. Number 13, let's wind up with this one. Innovators. People love innovators because we innovate. Now, I want you to look around you. I've done this before, but look around you at this very moment, at the things that you see that somebody has made. I mean, it didn't grow out of the ground, so somebody had to make it. So where I'm sitting, I'm seeing my computer. I see a flashlight, I see a telephone, I see lights. I see my mouse, I see a calculator. What else do I see? I see a pop bottle. I see a hairbrush. Somebody made all these things. Some innovative person, probably an engineer or an inventor, had to come up with the idea. I mean, these things haven't always existed. You know that, right? Sure you do. Well, who invented them? I mean, who was this innovator, or who were these innovators? These creative explorers that could see what others could not see. Now, that is not technically empathy, but it's something very akin to it. That is, we have insight. But this is an insight not into other people, but an insight into practical development, innovation, innovation. People love innovators because imagine what life would be like if the only things that we had were natural? No tools of any kind whatsoever. None. I mean, if you were to be stuck out in the woods somewhere and you had nothing, no cell phone. Do you remember, what was that show where they were stuck on an island, Gilligan's Island, and there was that theme song? So they were all by themselves. And I remember they didn't have anything but nature. And I remember watching the show, and I wasn't very old when that was on. But they had stuff, and I kept wondering, man, where are they getting all this stuff? They took all that with them on that little boat for, what was it, a 3-hour tour? And, well, it's television, but if you were really stuck on a deserted island, and you didn't even have your boat or your plane, however you got there, you would wish you had stuff, but you do have stuff. Who made this stuff? Well, by and large, people with autism. So people love us because of that, and a lot of times they don't even stop and think about it. Remember, we talked about that before, like we are introspective and neurotypical people. Not so much, maybe not at all. Some people don't think about these things, but because we are introspective, we do. We not only think of the things, but we think about the things. We are cognitively aware of all this stuff that we utilize on a daily basis. We are the type of people who stop and think about what it would be like to live 200 years ago or 500 years ago. When you stop and think about it, we live at a point in time, human history, that is the apex of human history. Not only because of the stuff we have, but because of healthcare, knowledge and information. There's never been anything close to this. And it seems like every day it gets better. Some people are afraid of innovation, but it seems like they keep adapting to it and they keep utilizing it. Hey, if you want to be Amish, you go ahead, live on a farm somewhere with your horse and buggy. And they are the coolest people. I love to go to Amish communities and talk about down to earth. Yeah, humus, they are, or they seem to be, at least on the surface, humble people. Yeah, I'm okay with that. But I like my Corvette. Sorry. And I guess I could hook up horses to it, drive it around town. But nope, not going to do it. So let's close out with this. Innovation is defined first and foremost as being born from unique thinking. This is attributed to Randall and Jossie, 2017. I have no idea what that is, but it's a reference. So highly creative individuals engage in a large volume of divergent thinking. In other words, they generate ideas and reactions that are unlike those of the average person. In other words, if you are autistic, you're not the average person. Some people say you're creepy. Some people say you live in the Uncanny Valley. Some people say you're weird. But I got to tell you, it's because we don't live in the hive mind. We are not hive mind thinkers. And it's hard to be innovative when you live in the hive mind because you have to adjust. And for the most part, you want to adjust to social acceptance. And you got to get outside that box, by and large, to innovate anything. Now, you probably know that if you've ever been in a workplace and you have a good idea and you express your good idea. And the first thing hive mind people want to do, neurotypical people want to do, is they want to squash your good idea. Why? Because, well, there you go. The social tier climbing, the matrix climbing. So we are outside the matrix, we're outside the hive mind, and it is here that we invent this stuff. The computer, the lights, the pop bottle, the mouse, the keyboard, the flashlight, all this stuff. Where did it come from? It came from outside the hive mind, where we live. People love us for that. Some people do. And they don't even know it, some of them. If you got something out of this video, you are invited to subscribe. Give this video a thumbs up if you subscribe. When you click the bell, that's important. because that tells YouTube to tell you when we upload new videos. And I try to do one every day, but sometimes time gets away from me or I just don't have an idea. Sometimes I have time to make a video, but I don't want to make one just to be making one. I want to have something to say. But if you want to know when I have something to say and set it, then click the bell. Again, give the video a thumbs up, share this on social media. Want to leave a comment, please do. I read all the comments and I usually respond to all of them. I don't know, maybe this video channel will grow, this YouTube channel will grow, and I'll no longer have time to do that. I hope so, but for now I can, so feel free to leave a comment, and yes, I will read them.